Just in case you needed a reminder of how old you are, the iPhone 5C from 2013 turns 10 this year. The 5C was the intended budget option to the more premium 5S back in the day, with the 5C just being an iPhone 5 from the year before, but in a colourful, funky plastic shell. However, its sales were not nearly as colourful as the phone, only selling an estimated 24 million units compared to the 5S's 164 million units. And so let's take a look at just what went wrong with the 5C, how usable it is today, and how it's held up as of 2023. Now, I've always really enjoyed talking about the iPhone 5C. I find its controversy very interesting, and so let me ramble on a bit about its backstory before we get into how usable it is today. So, it's late 2013, and instead of just making the iPhone from the year before cheaper, Apple, under the new leadership of Tim Cook, decides to do just that, but with a colourful spin. The iPhone 5 from the year before, but in a colourful plastic shell. Same display, same cameras, same internals, but more colourful, more affordable, and definitely more quirky than the premium 5S released alongside it. And so, why does something so quirky and so cool and so appealing just not sell? Well, there's a few things that went into the 5C's failure, one of them being the simple fact that the 5C was just $100 cheaper, actually less than $100 cheaper than the better 5S, with the 5C starting at $469 USD and the 5S being $549. So the choice was pretty easy for most people. You could have a phone with the most modern specs, not the ones from last year, a phone with more features such as Touch ID, and a phone that was made of more premium material for less than $100 more. And so as a result, the 5C was pretty much a commercial failure in the eyes of Apple, again selling just 24 million units as opposed to the 5S's 164 million. I mean, usually the budget-oriented phone would sell many more units than the more expensive one, but in this case, it was just simply worth spending that tiny bit extra to get a far superior device that would not only provide more features, but it would hold up better in the long term. If there had been a more significant price gap, say maybe $250, the 5C would have sold darn well. And so that's a brief wrap up on the story of the 5C's failure. Now let's take a look at how the 5C holds up as of 2023, starting off with the design. So the design strays pretty far away from what you would normally expect from something premium like the iPhone. It's covered from head to toe in plastic instead of glass and metal, and it's got a plethora of color options as opposed to the standard black, white, and gold. Instead, we've got green, blue, yellow, pink, or white if you're boring. It really had much more of the fun, sort of playful iPod look to it, rather than a much more expensive iPhone, and this is probably one of the contributing factors to its failure. As quirky as it was, people didn't want to spend $700 back in the day for something that looked and felt like a toy. Now, I mean, to be fair, the 5C was made of plastic, but it wasn't cheap and nasty plastic. It's got a glossy tone to it, which does make it more grippy, although it can be more susceptible to fingerprints much more than a matte feel. Plus, you can make the best plastic in the world, but metal is always going to be more premium 100% of the time. And in that sense, the 5C feels more like a toy compared to other iPhones. You know, the buttons sound a bit more hollow when you press them, and it was a lot chunkier than the 5 and 5S. Now with the size, it's definitely very out of place in today's world with iPad-sized phones. With just a 4-inch display, it can be a bit fiddly to tap on the right thing, although the plus side of course is that one-handed use is just perfect. Of course, the bezels on the front are laughably bad by today's standards, and the home button is also missing Touch ID, so you'll have to put your passcode in every damn time you want to use it. But fortunately, this was the last iPhone not to have Touch ID. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus both got it the following year. Now on the bottom, we have our one speaker and lightning port, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this speaker is absolute rubbish. It literally could have been pulled off a child's toy. Even for 2012 hardware, it's just no good. But fortunately, there is a headphone jack at the top so that you can listen to your music in a way that doesn't shred your eardrum to pieces. All in all, this design looks fun and quirky. I mean, you can definitely tell it's quite old with the size and bezels and tiny camera on the back, but for one-handed use, it's just perfect, and it's really easy to take anywhere. But moving back to the front of the phone, we have the 4-inch LCD display, which actually holds up quite a bit better than you might expect. It's a Retina display with a resolution of 1136 by 640 and pixel density of 326 pixels per inch, so you can't see any individual pixels from a normal viewing distance, and the colors are fine, but the size definitely limits it from being ideal for watching movies or reading articles, especially because of those huge bezels, and again, it's a lot harder to get precision on what you want to tap on. Plus, the brightness is also pretty bad, so if you're in the sun, you can't really see what you're doing. I mean, for 2012 hardware, this holds up pretty darn well in terms of actual sharpness and quality, but the size really limits it from being ideal to consume content on comfortably. Plus, just some small nitpicky things, it's only LCD, not OLED, so you're not getting those deep true blacks, and it's only 60Hz, there's no high refresh rate. Again though, this display is still pretty sharp and color accurate, it's just minuscule compared to what we're used to, unless you don't mind that fact, in which case it could provide quite a decent viewing experience, surprisingly. But do you know what's more than decent? The offer that today's video partner, Mint Mobile, has for you. If you want to get affordable service for as low as $15 a month without sacrificing any coverage, speed or data like so many cheap and nasty brands, sit tight. I mean, Mint Mobile is so darn good, even Ryan Reynolds got in on it.
Hey there, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. Enticing, right?
Why should you keep going on day after day paying so much more for the exact same service as mainstream brands? With Mint Mobile, you could not notice a speck of difference in speeds compared to other services, whether that be YouTube, games, or simply reading the news or browsing the web. And their sign-up process is just as quick as their mobile service. Which brings me on to something else. So many people are pushed away because mobile services don't have the best reputation for being easy to switch between. But Mint Mobile is going its own way with its super simple 15-minute sign-up method. Now, not only that, but you can get a limited edition 50% off deal and pay $15 a month for unlimited data instead of $30. So take 15 minutes out of your day now and sign up for Mint Mobile. It'll be the best 15 minutes you'll ever invest. And so if that sounds like a darn good deal to you, which it should, scan the QR code here or drop below to the link in the description. Thank you so much again to Mint Mobile for partnering with me for this video. And now let's take a look at the 5C's cameras. Now on the back of the 5C, we have the single 8 megapixel camera, and on the front, there's a whole 1.2 megapixels of selfie camera. Now the main lens is pretty much what you would expect from 11-year-old hardware. I mean, you can tell what's going on in the image. It's not a complete bust, but it's not something I would actually want to use for anything. Everything is generally grainy and blurry, and there's nothing like portrait mode or ultra wide. In fact, we don't even get image stabilization. It is a very far cry from what we have nowadays. I mean, sometimes you can get something half decent, but lighting conditions have to be pristine, and you have to hold it pretty darn still. So yeah, you don't want to be using this camera for anything in 2023, but it is interesting how this would have been considered top end in 2013. But the selfie camera is on a whole nother level of bad. Even for 2013, it seems just ridiculous. It's a 1.2 megapixels of blurry, grainy, distorted mess, but it actually does have quite a nostalgic feel to it, since a lot of people used devices back in the day with cameras like this. But the nostalgia is unfortunately all it's good for. You really don't want to be using this selfie camera in 2023. Now video can be shot in up to 1080p at 30 frames per second, and while it's not the worst video ever, it's still not something I would want to actually use. There's no stabilization, so it's going to be a lot harder to get a steady shot, and it's usually quite grainy. I mean, it's not the worst possible quality, but you can tell it was shot on a pretty old phone. So yeah, who would have thought? But photo and video shot on an 11-year-old mobile phone looks pretty bad. Now with the performance, like the cameras, it's quite gutless, and sometimes very frustrating. Inside we get the Apple A6 chipset and 1GB of RAM. Performance on here, as expected, is generally sluggish, unresponsive, and honestly quite frustrating. I actually had to use this phone for a while back in 2021, and apps just take ages to open. Scrolling around the interface was just so glitchy, and games were pretty much out of the question, except for Clash Royale, which for some reason actually worked pretty good, but everything else was a complete mess, and I'm glad that period is now behind me. If for some reason you find yourself using a 5C in 2023, that 7th floor window is going to look really good at times to throw the damn thing out of. I mean, it's not anything like the iPhone 4S on iOS 9, which is, pretty hard to do worse than, but it's a far cry from a pleasant user experience. It is definitely not something you would ever want to use. Now, of course, already being 11-year-old hardware, the phone is, as expected, already quite unusable in terms of app support and actually being able to get stuff done. The phone stopped getting updates in late 2017, being stuck on iOS 10 forever, and iOS 10 is now definitely showing its age. Lots of apps don't even work with it anymore, and the apps that do are far from their latest versions. For example, you can't even use YouTube anymore. The app just won't open because the software is just too old. So you'll have to go to the YouTube website in the browser, which is far from the most seamless experience. Also, Instagram is definitely missing quite a few things. I mean, you can still scroll and like posts and send messages, but it just doesn't feel very stable because of the app clashing with the older software. Now this does vary app to app. Some apps are going to have more recent versions than others, but the general consensus is that you're going to have a hard time doing a lot of things, and this, combined with the sluggish performance, makes for a very frustrating and annoying user experience, and unfortunately, as the phone fades further and further into obsolescence, this will only get worse over time. It ain't getting any better. Okay, now I will give credit where it's due. I mean, I think it's pretty cool that you can still do some things on a 10-year-old phone. You can still make calls with 4G, send texts, take notes, send emails, maybe some light web browsing on a 10-year-old phone with 11-year-old hardware. But if for some reason you're using a 5C as your main device or to try and get stuff done, please don't. It'll only end in tears, and you're much better off using something more modern and more supported. Now quickly touching on the battery life, unfortunately this is yet another downfall that time has imprinted upon the 5C. With just a 1510 mAh battery and with many years of of degradation, that leaves for a very short usage time, ranging from just half an hour to at most maybe 2 hours if you're lucky. Back then, the lower powered processors didn't really use up that much power, and the batteries hadn't been degrading for years and years. In this day and age though, I don't know what you'll be doing on here or why, but whatever it is, make sure you've got a charger nearby because you'll definitely be needing one, or just don't use a 5C in the first place. Probably a better option. And so, after covering each aspect of the iPhone 5C from a 2023 perspective, it's clear that it leaves quite a bit to be desired 10 years later. It is beyond underpowered, the cameras are laughable, and the lack of new software updates makes the vast majority of apps and tasks either incompatible or very buggy. I would say that the display holds up the best out of everything if I had to choose. Yes, it is tiny, but the quality is still there. Everything else though does not receive a pass, and you really shouldn't be using this phone or buying one in 2023. Especially don't buy one. Even though they can be had for under $50 USD, there's literally no use for them at all. If you want a backup phone, there's just so many better options out there for the same price that will serve you much better. But the 5C is an interesting device that I love to talk about. You know, it's just so quirky and colorful, and it just went against everything Apple did back in the day. Had it been priced just a little bit lower, it would have sold like hotcakes. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Also, if you'd like to have a stalk, my Instagram is at tech_spree and my Twitter is at techspree1. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.